It's the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on Better Sports Network.
Seven o'clock in the PM on a Thursday on the Better Sports Network means it's time for the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show presented by the FFPC, myffpc.com. I am your host, Eric Balkman, at Eric Balkman on Twitter. You can check me out on the High Stakes Fantasy Football or the RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown, anything FFPC, as well as this show right here. Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen. We're here for the next 2 hours, and I want to welcome in my co-host tonight. And I said this before we went on the air. He is my best friend, at least for right now, and probably going forward. But we had a cancellation on our guest tonight, and I'll get to that in a second. But I said, well, who do I need to step up here? Who's a guy that could come in on short notice who is a radio expert, a guy who is a big fan of high-stakes fantasy football and has drafted dozens, maybe even hundreds of leagues at this point? I look no further than at Twitter, at JD Goat District, from the Goat District, Mr. John Daniel, the pride of Canada. Welcome in to the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show, my friend.
Thanks for having me, man. This is an honor. I'm a big fan of you. I appreciate what you do as the host who kind of steers this machine. A bearded man like myself, not as hairy today, but you're definitely up there in the Muzio. The Billy Muzio tier right now of beards, but no, man, this is great. I like I said, it worked out because later this summer I'm going to be traveling a bit, so I'm happy to jump on and kind of save the day.
You know what was great about this, and you mentioned Billy Muzio. He was we had 2 weeks ago. We had a live Fantasy Pros draft that myself and Dave Terpoli covered, but before that, Billy Muzio was my co-host on the show, and he said, "Oh, we're bearded brothers tonight," and I'm like, "Yeah, I guess we are." And he's getting up there. Like I got to get rid of mine. It's coming. Like it's been too long. It's funny because I'm in the Northwoods, not in the Northwoods, but I'm in Northeast Wisconsin here. A couple of Jordan Love Hail Marys southwest of Lambeau Field, and it gets hot at this time of year. Like I probably should have shaved it by now, but I haven't. I will shave it off at some point. In fact, next Thursday, and I'll tell you who our guest co-host next Thursday is coming up later on in the show. But next Thursday, this could all be gone, JD. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm not Nostradamus. But thank you for coming in on short notice. I certainly appreciate it. Now, you just did a show last night, right? 2 full hours of fantasy goodness. Can you tell the listeners a little bit about the GOAT District?
For sure. So for those who don't know the GOAT District, we're high stakes, high win rate, fantasy football content. We bring in the biggest guests, the biggest players, and we've been doing that for years now. This year we've had, a little invite into the Player Profiler family in the sense that every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern, you'll find the GOAT District streaming live on the Player Profiler Network. And last night we had the man himself, the brains behind the machine, Matt Kelly, the podfather himself, on, and it's always a blast. He's been in the GOAT District a few times now, and we talked must draft players, which was fun. We talked about, some of the news, some of the stuff we'll talk about today, but make sure you go check that out. And then you can find us on our own channel, the GOAT District. We do live drafts on there, high stakes. We do best ball on Ballin. And then Dan and I do the Owner's Lounge. We co-own some FFPC Dynasty teams together, some high stakes teams we've had success with. So we go behind the scenes every week. We try to talk some trade proposals, send off some trades, see what we can get done to kind of mold these teams and keep winning some cash. And otherwise, on any podcast platform, you'll find the GOAT District. And it's myself, Dan Williamson, at Overhyped Sleeper, no E on the N, the OG Fantasy. You guys know him from the Player Profiler. And every once in a while, Andrew Schellenberg drops in to give us a draft or two.
You follow John on Twitter, JD, at JD Goat District, the Goat District on Twitter, at Goat District. Want to give a shout out to the FFPC, the sponsor of the show tonight. Remember, 2 separate $1 million grand prizes. JD is chasing after both of them this year, I know. In the FFPC Main Event, you can win $1 million. In the Fantasy Pros Championship, you can win $1 million. That is just a $350 entry fee. And if you want to play fantasy football, if you love fantasy football the way JD does, play it year round. myffpc.com. Dynasty leagues are there. 1,300 plus. over a decade, not a single one has ever folded. So if you're ever worried about your league folding, shady commissioners, just a bunch of owners in the league deciding to abandon it, you don't have to worry about that with myffpc.com. Join your dynasty leagues there as well. John Daniel, my co-host tonight, Anthony Rivera, the man behind the glass. Let's get into it here. And the first thing I want to bring up tonight, JD, is Saquon Barkley. Now, we're at this time of year where it's mid-July, and I don't want to overrate the contract aspect of players potentially holding out or wanting to sit out until they get what they want. I don't want to overrate that. But I feel like at this time of year, it's worth bringing up. Diana Rossini, who covers the NFL for ESPN, says that Saquon Barkley and the Giants are still at a stalemate to reach terms on a new contract. A new deal, the deadline is going to be this coming Monday. Now, Barkley was already franchise tagged earlier in this offseason, and he didn't like it. He's set to earn just over $10 million only this year on the franchise tag, but Barkley says he wants a long-term deal, doesn't necessarily have to be a market resetting type deal, right? He just wants to be paid what he feels he's worth. Now, he has not ruled out sitting out the entire season. I would imagine that there's a chance he might sit out week 1 or something like that. I don't know what's going to happen. But what I want to pick your brain about here, JD, is you look at Saquon Barkley's ADP in the Fantasy Pros Championship at fantasymojo.com. Darren Armani, who runs this website at Fantasy Mojo on Twitter, always give him a shout out. All the ADP data we cite is from directly from him. Running back 4 at the 202. Now, JD, if you are drafting at the end of a Fantasy Pros Championship, of an FFPC Best Ball tournament draft, if you were sitting at the end of the first round, is this scaring you off Barkley at all? That's question number 1. And number 2, are you bumping up guys like Matt Breida or Eric Gray in the later rounds of your FFPC or Fantasy Pros tournament, knowing that these guys might be worthwhile early on?
Yeah, a lot to chew on there. I mean, Barkley's I'm looking at a Fantasy Pros from July 12th, 11:55. So I'm guessing that's the live draft in the evening, kind of the last one. And he went kind of almost mid. He's already at almost mid-second. So Tony Pollard creeping up ahead of him in some drafts. When I'm on the back end of the drafts, I've been usually double tapping on receiver. That's usually, I just love the bag of receivers there, the Garrett Wilsons, AJ Brown, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Lamb when he falls back there. But I think you're going to start seeing Barkley move more towards the back end of the second. If he creeps there and he keeps going and even into the third, that's when you want to start smashing the drafts, especially in the big tournaments, because you've got people right now that have him on their rosters who drafted him end of the first, beginning of the second. So you have kind of that advantage as you see him drop the ADP, take advantage. Dynasty, send those offers for Barkley right now. You know what I mean? Anyone who's nervous, like you said, Balky, Eric, what do you prefer? I didn't even ask you.
Well, here's the thing. Like, I feel like if I'm drafting in mid-July, early July, I always feel like these contract dispute guys, whether it's rightful or wrongful, they get penalized in ADP. And I feel like that's when I'm trying to strike on these guys. Now, it's a little bit different in your situation because of where they're going. You talk about CeeDee Lamb and some of these, Garrett Wilson, Devontae Adams, AJ Brown. Maybe fantasy players prefer the wide receivers there, regardless of the contract situation. I get that, right? But if I'm looking at running back there and I see a depressed value in Saquon Barkley, and by the way, like, we already got FFPC main event slow drafts going off right now. So people, gunning for $1 million in that are already, have made their thoughts known on Saquon Barkley. I look at Barkley as a guy that if you are okay with him or if you like him, man, you got to be hitting him right now. If this contract thing drags out into training camp, which I think it might, that might be the point that you see his lowest value. I don't necessarily think he is going to sit out week 1. The moral of the story here, JD, is I don't think that we're going to be missing Barkley this season. He's going to play. No. He's going to play the majority of the season. But the later this thing, draws out, the more he falls in drafts. Because people are, the main event, you're ponying up the better part of $2,000. Are you going to wage? Are you going to stake your $2,000 claim on Saquon Barkley? Are you going to try to win $1 million in the Fantasy Pros Championship with Saquon Barkley, knowing that there's a non-zero chance that he sits out the season? I don't think that happens, but I think it seeps into people's minds. You know this. You draft in these contests. I think the deeper we get into the season or into the preseason without a deal being struck between these two parties, the lower the ADP goes on Barkley. I know he's going to play, and that's why I'd be striking on him.
July 4th, he went 10th. July 4th in the main in a draft. So he's already moving to the mid-second.
Mm-hmm.
What I talked about on our channel, I believe it was our channel, or Dan and I were a guest spot somewhere. But if you look across right now, the running back position, the landscape is interesting on its own. You've got all these free agents. We haven't seen this caliber of free agents out there. Now you've got guys like Alvin. You've got guys like Barkley holding out. I mean, are running backs kind of taking a stand here? They figure they have the offseason, they have time. They're putting their foot down thinking, oh, you think running backs don't matter? All right, let's see, right? So maybe they're just trying to dig their heels a bit as a group to try to change a bit of, I don't know, the financial landscape, I guess, of the running backs. Is it going to work? I don't know. I'm just saying that I'm starting to see a trend. Like you said, these running backs are not in a rush, right? But that's, like you said, the time for fantasy to pounce. Whatever format you're playing in, this is when you want to take advantage of these guys who you're getting at a discount and that can win you leagues.
And that's my point. Like, I think these running backs can say, we're going to take a stand. Le'Veon Bell did this a few years ago. I want to reset the market for running backs and show we still matter. That's fine and good. But me personally, I don't think they're changing anything. I don't think one single running back is going to change the landscape. And how do we use that for fantasy football? We utilize that because it will create a panic, or at least a semi-panic, among a lot of high-stakes players and just, your regular run-of-the-mill fantasy players as well. They're going to let these guys drop. And especially if you're a volume player, these are the players you need to be striking on. These are the players that we look back on, JD, in December, and we look at these leaderboards for the $1 million grand prize, and like, how did that guy get Saquon Barkley at the 207? How did that guy get Saquon Barkley at the 209? It makes no sense. But this is what you can do right now, because eventually when the Giants and Barkley, again, in my opinion, are going to strike upon some sort of agreement that is going to keep Barkley on the field for the majority of the 2023 season, we're done talking about it. And we're going to be looking back on like, wow, I really should have been drafting Barkley at that point. And that's the point we're at right now.
Do you have any worries with these guys once they do sign these big contracts?
Well, okay, so that's another thing, because we have seen the running back contracts not work out. Like, I think of Ezekiel Elliott right off the top of my head.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that didn't work out. But for me, that's more of a dynasty standpoint for these running backs. For me, it's just like, yeah, I once they sign this big money deal where teams are paying them for what they did rather than what they're going to do, then I would have a problem with it in Dynasty. And then it's like, okay, I'm selling for 80 cents on the dollar, 85 cents on the dollar, and get out on it right now. For redraft, it's a little bit different. There is still risk, but I guess for me, and this is a personal thing, JD, I'm willing to take that risk on a 1 year standpoint, and hopefully they cash in and hopefully they crush it. And then they get they restructure the deal or what have you. I'm more concerned about it from a dynasty standpoint, not from redraft.
Yeah, I mean, I talk about if I'm playing dynasty or redraft, I'm approaching the running back position 1 year at a time. The one thing about Barkley that does, he's not someone you don't want any part of, even if you're not taking running backs early. Look at what New York did at the receiver position. Not much. Mm-hmm. Like who's there? Galladay's still there. Like Hyatt comes in, limited with route running and a lot of what he can do. So you've got Isaiah Hodgins.
Shepard, just like the regular run-of-the-mill guys.
Scrubs, you know what I mean? So who's going to get the ball? Who's going to get the volume? It's going to be Waller and tight end premium. Go get yourself some Waller. Mm-hmm. I know Dan and I made a move for him recently, and it's going to be Barkley and Daniel Jones. That's basically going to be the offense. Yeah, you'll have a receiver here and there that'll give you those weeks, those spike weeks, but that's where the offense is going to run. Talking about narrow target tree, that's definitely Barkley being a big part of that.
And you and I, we don't have time to talk about it tonight, but you and I are of the same mind, and Dan Williamson are of the same mind as Darren Waller. I think he's being his value is being depressed right now, not only in FFPC Dynasty leagues, but in FFPC best ball tournaments, the Fantasy Pros Championship, the FFPC Main Event. I think he's in for a big year in New York. I want to move on to Las Vegas. No, not to talk about the Raiders, but to talk about David Charn's report. David Charns, who works for 8 News now in Las Vegas, he said that Alvin Kamara has agreed to a plea deal where he pleads no contest to misdemeanor charge of breach of peace for the nightclub beating in Las Vegas at the Pro Bowl weekend a couple years ago. He's going to have to do community service. He's going to have to pay $100,000 to the victim for his medical bills. But there is no felony charge. The felony charge has now been dropped. This is a big thing for Kamara personally. For fantasy-wise, JD, when we look at this, and I know you've been drafting and you know where he's going, but to tell everybody, in the Fantasy Pros Championship right now, Kamara is running back 31 at the 803. The NFL has not weighed in on this yet. They could still suspend him. I know. I feel like it was a what draft? We were covering a draft for the FFPC, and it seemed like the chat right now or during that show kind of settled on a 6-game suspension for Kamara. That's what they were banking on. Is that what you're banking on? What kind of a suspension do you think Kamara is facing this year? And if you're drafting right now, JD, Alvin Kamara, running back 31 in the early 8th round of the Fantasy Pros Championship, is that a value that you want to strike upon, or it's still a value that's too high and you're going to wait?
Yeah, he's an interesting one. 30 hours of community and 100,000 in medical bills is what he's basically committed to. As he puts this plea in. The thing is, he's got no prior history. When you look at that's any detriment to the NFL. Mm-hmm. So he's got that on his side. My guesstimate would be 4 to 6 game suspension. 6 would probably, be on the higher side. It seems like people thought this would be a good thing for him, and maybe this is best case scenario surrounding, all the evidence and everything. But the problem for me is he's been going 8th round all offseason. Mm-hmm. July 12th, you start seeing him in the 7th round. Problem is the suspension now with those missing weeks is going to cap how high he goes in ADP. For me, it's always about opportunity costs, and I'm going to mention that a lot tonight. Who else can I draft? I way prefer grabbing Akers, J.K. Dobbins in the 6th round if Kamara's there. And it's the same in from the 6th to the 8th. It's really juicy. There's a lot of options there. Kamara last year was what, RB 13?
I'd have to look it up, but that's right around there. Yeah,
RB 13. He gave you, I think, 4 or 5 significant, RB 1-ish weeks the whole season. He's getting up there, man. They brought in Kendre Miller, who I love, my most owned player on the FFPC right now.
Wow.
That's maybe bold, but that's where I'm at. And they bring in Jamal Williams, who love the kid, love the personality, what it brings to a team. He's a goal line beast, but we've seen the best of Jamal Williams. You know what I mean? He comes in probably more of a depth piece, will definitely run the goal line. But is Kamara really going to be Kamara of old when he comes back after being off, dealing with all this stuff? He's going to be, 28. I don't know. To me, again, opportunity costs. He's got to come down lower for me to start considering him.
Longtime FFPC player and FFPC league champion Rich Bilyeu joining the show on YouTube tonight on the Better Sports Network. And he said, he mentioned Williams and Miller like you did, but he also mentions Michael Thomas, who could be potentially healthy, Chris Olave, whose value is spiking, and then Juwan Johnson, who a lot of high-stakes players are high on this year as well. And Rich says, I'm steering clear of this headache, even at running back 31 in the 8th round. Remember, he's going at just behind Pacheco, Javonte Williams, and James Cook. He's going right ahead of Antonio Gibson, A.J. Dillon, Charbonnet, and then Pirine there as well. So I think there are a lot of reasons to fade Kamara. Let me ask you this, and I know, God, I wish we had a 4-hour show tonight, JD. We just don't. But I want to ask a follow-up on this.
Our show last night was supposed to be 60 minutes.
And it lasted forever, right? I get it. I know how it goes. But with Kamara, let's take the legal stuff out of it. What did you see from him at the end of the season from an on-the-field standpoint that would either give you faith in drafting him at that spot or maybe giving you pause saying, maybe I've seen the best of Kamara and I should let somebody else draft him?
Well, from week 10 to week 18, other than being RB8 in week 16 against Cleveland, got a touchdown that week, over 100 yards. He was RB 29, 20, 24, 42, 42. So again, how much impact is he going to have? You just talked about all the guys in this offense. Do I think Michael Thomas is going to be the Michael Thomas of old? And, he could be. We don't know. Derek Carr.
There's a non-zero chance of it. Yeah,
exactly. To me, I see Ridley similar to Michael Thomas. Like when you're away from the game for a while, that affects you, man. It's like in fighting, that ring rust that they talk about. That's a real thing. These guys have to come back. Michael Thomas has beyond, there's something else going on there. So who knows? There's always a wild card there. But I just think, like you said, I like Carr going there. I like a lot of the pieces. Love Olave. I mean, you can't not like Olave, especially in Dynasty. Mm-hmm. But I don't gravitate to this team in fantasy right now with the pieces that are there, other than, like I said, Kendre Miller, just kind of looking down the line.
Save your thoughts on Kendre Miller, because we have a special section dedicated to Kendre Miller coming up later on in the program tonight. And I would definitely want to talk to you about that. But keeping it on the running back tip, let's switch over to the AFC right now. Zach Rosenblatt, who covers the New York Jets for The Athletic, says that he believes Carter is going to begin the season as the Jets' number 2 running back. Now, we normally don't talk a whole lot about backup running backs at this time of year, as far as, beat writers taking a stand on them. But I think it's more interesting in New York because Breece Hall is coming off that ACL tear. Michael Carter is battling not only with Zonovan Knight, who came on and was a godsend probably about 2/3 of the way into the season for FFPC players last year, but also is Israel Abanikanda, who we talked about on this show with several guests, how excited they were for this guy. He lands in New York as a day 3 pick, and then I guess some of the shine gets, removed from him at that point. But the fact that he's still there and people are still talking him up, I think we need to pay attention to this. Michael Carter, it's not like he lit the world on fire last year. 3.5 yards per carry on the season. He caught passes, which is good. You're looking at him right now in the Fantasy Pros Championship drafts, running back 72 at the 17-12. He is basically free in that format, JD. I don't know how you fall in on the Jets running backs this year. I don't want to necessarily talk. Well, we can talk about Breece Hall here from the standpoint of when do you think he is going to, come back for the Jets this year? Like when you could be starting him in fantasy. Number 2, how good he's going to be this year. The first year coming off the ACL tear, and then how you fall in on the backup Jets running backs. I know it's a lot. I'll let you chew on it however you want, my friend.
No, man, I love this. I mean, I started laughing a bit because I did a Michael Carter profile for the world famous draft kit last year, but before they drafted Breece Hall. So you can imagine me having to redo that video.
Yeah.
Once the draft came reality. To me, this looks like they're setting it up for a trade. They're trying to big him up. There is some chatter about like the Cowboys trying to work something out. He's got, 4th round draft capital. He's shown flashes here and there. Before Breece Hall came in, he was decent. He was catching the ball. He's a usable running back. So for a team like Dallas, they need the depth behind Pollard if they're not going to bring back Zeke or another one of those guys. Mm-hmm. Thing is, they're bringing in Rodgers, right, in New York. There's high expectations. They're taking a run at this. They love Hall. Obviously, everyone loves Hall. He is coming off injury, so there is that concern, like how quickly is he coming back? How's he going to be? But you want to surround Rodgers with guys he can trust, right? He had Aaron Jones. He had A.J. Dillon in Green Bay. He was protected. I could see a guy like Zeke maybe going there. Someone that can protect Rodgers, that can help the young players in that offense. So for me, this is probably more about trying to wave Michael Carter around for maybe a possible trade.
Okay.
Than claiming that he's the backup in the middle of July when you just drafted a rookie running back and, Michael Carter hasn't really been blowing off the doors or anything.
And he hasn't. And we kind of know what we have in him. I think that's the thing. It's like, how do you restrain yourself from drafting too much of Abanikanda? Because he's the mystery box.
And he's so cheap.
That's the thing. It's like, and I almost wonder, and like you can make the case like, okay, let's say Carter doesn't get traded and he is the backup. you could still make the case that Abanikanda is the better way to spend your late round pick because of the mystery box phenomenon. Again, we know what Michael Carter's capable of. We've seen it for a couple of seasons now. Abanikanda, maybe he could be a 3-down running back in the NFL. We don't know. And I think that's what makes it most intriguing. A lot to unpack there. We don't have the time. I want to move on. Last year, JD, in the FFPC main event, when the season started, over the last few days in the ADP, Cooper Kupp was the de facto number 1 overall pick. But the first running back off the board on average at the 102 was Jonathan Taylor. Now, Jonathan Taylor coming into this year in the Fantasy Pros Championship ADP, you're looking at him falling all the way down to the 203 on average. Jonathan Taylor is the 5th running back off the board. Have the FFPC players let him fall too far where he is a value right now? Oftentimes, we don't see a player drafted as the, again, 101 or 102 the previous year, falling a full round, especially when he's, again, according to Jim Irsay, he's healthy and he's ready to go. We don't often see this. Is Jonathan Taylor a player that people who are picking at the end of the first round need to be all over there as one of their first 2 picks off the board?
Yeah, I mean, as a Colts fan, as you could tell behind me there, I mean, you learn to take anything Irsay says with a grain of salt, but or a grain of something else. But having said that, I mean, JT, when he got injured or when he had the surgery, kind of gave a timeline. There was a timeline out there, and this kind of lines up with it. So it does make sense. I think people are sleeping on the Colts as a whole. You're starting to see the Anthony Richardson hype come back a bit. You see some highlights in the gym and all that kind of stuff. So people are getting excited there. But look, the Colts brought in a 5th round running back in the draft in Evan Hall, who's decent. Like, he looks like an all around kind of guy that can fill in, when needed. But yeah, I mean, you're seeing less and less total studs at the running back position. Mm-hmm. And as much as I'm a later running back kind of guy, I love building those hero running back, those stud I call it like a pillar running back, where you get your one stud, you just smash the other positions, and then you go deep later at the running back position. So for me, a guy like JT is perfect, especially if you can get him at a discount. I think that as we get closer to the season, I see his ADP going back up. You're going to start seeing those Anthony Richardson highlights, and you're going to see JT on the field. This team's excited. I mean, they're not going to make a run to the, for playoffs or anything like that. I mean, who knows in that division? But I think JT, when he's been healthy, he's been a top 8. He's been number 1. Last year, he slipped off a bit, dealt with injuries. I think this year is a comeback season for Jonathan Taylor. So especially if you're like in Dynasty and you're competing, go knock on the door, man. You could probably get him at a pretty good price right now.
Rich in the YouTube chat just brought up the fact that, you mentioned Evan Hall, JD. Rich thinks he looks very good and a great pass catcher as well. He thinks that Taylor is not going to see enough passes to warrant a high pick, maybe part and parcel because of the presence of Evan Hull. How do you fall in on that? I know you said you already like the receivers sort of at the end of the first and second round, but how do you fall in on that? Like, maybe Taylor's not going to see the pass catching opportunities he saw when he was a rookie.
Yeah, I'm not too worried about it. He's a 5th rounder. Normally I got to watch the way I word it. You often see running backs, especially with the pass catching part of their game, even if they are pass catchers in the NFL, the coaches are not going to throw them in there game 1 and start launching balls at them. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. That's a part of their game they're going to develop. Catching the ball and running the ball are 2 different things. Running backs can adapt on the ground a lot easier than they can in the air. So to me, it's kind of like the whole thing with Charbs going to Seattle with Walker. Like they think just Charbs going to come in, walk in, and take over the backfield. It's not happening, man. JT's got this thing locked down. I'm sorry. If you're thinking Hall's going to take over, I mean, take him late. You're getting him super late. It's good value. You want to draft a team with, I'm not a handcuff guy, but they're far enough from each other to justify taking a Hall. But I don't think Hall's going to be a factor in 2023.
Let's play this. This is an old HSFF hour game that we used to play. Rich brought these guys up in the chat. Let's play a Would You Rather. You always call it On the Clock on the Goat District show. Let's do this. Jonathan Taylor or Saquon Barkley?
Jonathan Taylor.
Jonathan Taylor or Nick Chubb?
Jonathan Taylor. But I do love Chubb.
Okay. Jonathan Taylor or Tony Pollard?
It's right there. I honestly, like, I want even. They're even for me. I'll probably like alternate. If I do take a running back, those are the guys that I'm taking, and I probably alternate.
I'd love to talk. Maybe we'll get into Tony Pollard later on in the program, but I want to talk about something that's a little bit more compelling for high stakes players right now, especially the ones that have been drafting, basically since January, yourself included, JD. Now, Javonte Williams said this week, I think it was this week, maybe it was late last week, Sunday. He said that the quote plan is for him to be cleared to play by training camp. The quote from Javonte Williams. I feel like I'm ready to go. But as people have pointed out, the plan and I feel and like, these are all statements and words that can, give him the wiggle room to get out of this, right? And we have seen, how many times have we seen, JD, over the last 10 plus years, people who tear their ACL, they're often not the players we remember that first season back. My consideration with Javonte Williams and drafting him, and I can tell you right now, in the Fantasy Pros Championship over the last 3 days, his ADP is running back 29 at the 706. Yes, that sounds very exciting for a guy who was like a, end of the first, early second round pick last year. But man, I have seen that. One of my co-hosts for my local show here in Wisconsin always says, I've seen this movie before. I know how it ends. Well, I can say that about Javonte Williams. I've seen this movie before. I know how it ends. This is the type of player that is going to get steamed up because he's practicing or doing stuff. And maybe even if he is ready for week one, I just don't think we're going to see capital letter Javonte Williams like we have seen in the past from him the first year off this torn ACL. It's juicy that you can get him in the mid-7th. Man, I don't know if I want to utilize that pick on this player this year. I feel like he's going to let us down.
Yeah. Every time I hear about Javonte, I'm thinking about J.K. Dobbins. That's what I'm thinking. But not only did he tear his ACL, you can add his LCL and his PLC, which I don't even know what those are. I know I just tore a rotator cuff in my left shoulder a couple months ago. And I don't sleep at night because it's so painful. I'm waiting for my MRI in a couple weeks because the inflammation was so bad. We saw J.K. Dobbins last year, and I fell for it. Talking healthy, I love Dobbins, so I was like, "Oh, this is Dobbins season," which it is this year. You guys go watch last night. I talk about him in the Matt Kelly show, our must draft players, and I actually did his profile for the world famous draft kit over there at the Player Profiler. But not only did he take time to kind of get back in game shape and get back into flow of things, he had to take time off for more rehab. So he came back. He was, he was in a media argument with I forget who about if he was healthy or not because they reported that he wasn't. But it took time. For me, you got to wait. I think Kupp was another guy who came back and took, it took that one season for them to really get back into. It's kind of like that ring rust I talk about. It's we don't know how these guys really heal. The running back position is a physical. It's the most physical position. I mean that and probably tight end, right? In the offense. So I'm avoiding Javonte. I've been avoiding Javonte. I see a guy right beside him on this draft board right now in Antonio Gibson, who I can't stop drafting. We'll talk about him later. Mm-hmm. But I rather grab a bit of Pirine, and that way, if they bring in Dalvin or whoever they might bring in, which I think is probably the case, Leonard Fournette type of move, it doesn't hurt you as much if you're not fully committed. I think if you're buying into Javonte heavily in the 8th round, again, I find the 6th to the 8th juicy at those positions. So it's the opportunity cost is high for me for a guy where we're not sure about his health.
So let me ask you, this will be the final question of this segment here, and I think it's worthwhile talking about. This is more of a question. So it's been reported that the Jets are gaining momentum to sign Dalvin Cook, and that he could enter this backfield along with Carter, Abanikanda, and obviously Breece Hall and Zonovan Knight. This is more of a philosophical question for you because you brought up Leonard Fournette. Kareem Hunt is obviously still out there as well.
Mm-hmm.
These are all players that could definitely disrupt backfields with whoever they sign with. And this is important because people are drafting now based on thinking, well, they kind of know how the backfields for the majority of the NFL are going to go, but not all of them. Can you tell me a little bit about how you would handle specifically Dalvin Cook here, but just sort of the guys like that, like Leonard Fournette, like Kareem Hunt, guys that could be backfield disruptors. And if you want to throw in the conversation of the players that are currently being drafted higher that would stand to lose a lot, this is a tricky minefield, JD, of high stakes players kind of wading through this early in the middle part of the summer.
Yeah, it's tricky, but it's fun, right? The running back position this year is so deep, and the way the receiver position plays, that's why when you're talking to me about JT and Barkley, I'm not drafting a lot of these guys. Like, I love getting receivers early across the board. FFPC, the way that the format is, I like being top heavy at receiver, getting my studs, and then I can fill in the running back position. When you're looking at the running back position as a whole, for myself anyways, like I said, I'm looking at 1 year at a time, but I'm basically looking at a player is how many clean starts is this guy going to give me? Because that's what you want at running back. You want to be able to put a guy in your lineup and know that he's going to give you this many starts, because then you can fill in the rest of your lineup to fill in the blanks, right? The empty spots. So for me with Dalvin, I mean, I think it's great if he goes to the Jets. I just talked about Michael Carter being a trade possibility. I think that's exactly why that they do want to bring in a vet. Obviously, it helps Rodgers. I talked about, the running backs that he had in Green Bay. But, I mean, for fantasy, am I excited about Dalvin going there? You have Breece Hall there. I think he's going to be a great mentor for Breece Hall. But I don't see Dalvin being the guy when Hall is healthy. I don't know when that's going to be. But I don't think it's going to take that long into the season for Hall to be back. Again, I don't know where his injury is compared to these other guys. I haven't, looked at it as deeply, and we don't really know at the end of the day with these guys with their health, right? But yeah, for me, I would like him to go, like, selfishly, I would love to see Dalvin go to the Jets just so that I can go out and buy some Hall, because I can't get Hall anywhere right now, in Dynasty. But I mean, I like it for football, but for fantasy, it doesn't really excite me for Dalvin, and I'm probably going to keep just passing on him.
Can we extrapolate that take on Dalvin Cook to players like Fournette, players like Hunt, these free agent running backs that are still out there?
But those guys are so much cheaper, though. That's the thing, Eric, is they're so much cheaper, right? So if you hit a guy like Fournette, it's hard not to take this guy. Where I'm looking at a board right now, he's going 14th round of the main event. This was July 4th. It's a couple weeks or a week behind now. But these guys are all going cheap. You talk about Kareem Hunt with his pass catching ability. He's a good complement piece, right? To an offense that maybe has a one-dimensional running back and need a guy to come in to complement like he did with Chubb. So these guys are cheap in right now in drafts, and they're going to be cheap for the NFL team that brings them in, which will probably be later in the offseason. But now is the time to get these guys before they sign to a team or before they're on a team, because then their values are going to go up ADP wise.
Fantasy Pros Championship ADP, seventh round for Dalvin Cook. And then, as JD pointed out, Leonard Fournette, 14th, 13th round, Kareem Hunt, 16th round. These are the times that you need to be striking on these players. Those are the players you need to be striking on as well. Ladies and gentlemen, that is around the NFL as far as the running backs go. There's still been plenty of wide receiver news over the last couple of weeks. JD's going to get into that with me in the next segment. He is John Daniel, the host of the GOAT District Show. Obviously, check him out at GOAT District, at JD GOAT District on Twitter. I'm Eric Balkman from the FFPC, the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, the RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this, talking about the latest news among receivers in the NFL and what you need to know for drafting them in your high stakes fantasy football leagues.
The High Stakes Fantasy Football Show with Eric Balkman.
Breece Hall right now, and I've talked to plenty of high stakes players. I'm sure you have too, Kev. Had Hall not torn his ACL last year, he might have been the 101 in drafts this year. That's how good he was looking last year, and obviously with the addition of Aaron Rodgers. At the 305, running back 11 behind Derrick Henry and Ramondre Stevenson, right ahead of Jahmyr Gibbs and Najee Harris. Your thoughts on him as a mid-third round pick? How have you been attacking him? Have you been getting him at that spot so far this year?
Yeah, if I start out with 2 wide receivers, Breece Hall is right at the top of the queue coming into the third. If I knew he'd be healthy for week 1, I was still a little.
Well, he'd be going higher than the mid third.
Right. He may go 101. Well, RB1 at least.
Yeah.
But I don't think we know that. Even if he's healthy in spring and the summer, I still like if I'm running a team, if I'm the coach, I'm bringing him back slow. Like he's on a pitch count. Like I want him for the end of the season because I got Aaron Rodgers for the playoffs, right? Like even if he's fully healthy, I would work him in slow. But that is actually what you want. Like he's still going to get the high value touches. So yeah, if we know he's healthy, he's a first rounder. So like if he's sitting there in the third, especially when I get 2 wide receivers to start, I'll take Hall all day.
Yeah, it almost makes me think that the uncertainty with Breece Hall has made him unfairly fall too far, right? Like because we're talking about the team here in June. They're still hoping that he's ready for week 1. This is not, oh, we'll see what happens. Oh, we're taking it day by day. Oh, we're liking how he's coming along. No, they still think by week 1. And the fact that we have that timeline, I think, maybe bumps him up, especially as the drafting season gets deeper and deeper here in July and August. Maybe we start seeing him go up the boards as well.
It's the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on Better Sports Network.
Let me tell you a little bit about the Fantasy Alarm Fantasy Football Draft Guide and an all-pro subscription. The MLB All-Star break is going on right now. It ends tonight. Starts back, or the MLB All-Star, or the MLB second half of the season will start up tomorrow. But listen, this is the time that you need to start prepping for the fantasy football season. Fantasy Alarm's all-pro subscription has everything you need to win, including the Fantasy Alarm Fantasy Football Draft Guide, your cheat sheet, and one-stop shop for dominating your drafts. And it's digital, constantly updated with new information. That's what we need, constant upgrades on this purchase for just $26.99. Get it free with a monthly or annual all-pro subscription to Fantasy Alarm. You can start your 7-day trial of Fantasy Alarm All-Pro for free and get immediate free access to the draft guide. All you got to do is just go to fantasyalarm.com. John Daniel from the GOAT District joining me tonight at JD GOAT District on Twitter, from at GOAT District. We talked a lot about running backs in the front part of the show tonight. I want to shift the focus to wide receivers, and not all these guys that we're talking about. I feel like, year after year, we see a lot of receivers that we can kind of predict good years from them or bad years. Running backs is a little bit more volatile. I want to kind of get into the minutia with some of these receivers with you tonight, JD. And the minutia will start off in Chicago with Darnell Mooney. Now, according to WGN TV, Darnell Mooney said he is going to be, quote, ready to roll when the Bears open their training camp. He had an ankle injury in November this past year. He didn't play the rest of the season. In 2021, this is a dude who caught 81 passes for 1,055 yards and 4 touchdowns. Last year, he only played in 12 games, 40 catches, less than 500 yards, and just 2 touchdowns. It was a career low 5.1 targets per game from him. Now, this year, here's the things going for him. He has an offense that is better equipped to protect their quarterback, we'll say. They have already gone on record. Some of the coaches have gone on record saying that they're going to pass more this year. And they've acquired DJ Moore. These are all good things. Bad things. They've also acquired DJ Moore. So, while the passing offense should be better, I don't know how much it affects Mooney. They already made the deal last year for the 32nd pick in the draft. They acquired Chase Claypool. He's still on this offense. I still like Cole Kmet. You look at the backfield with Khalil Herbert and obviously Roshan Johnson. Those guys are going to soak up some catches as well. Mooney is a 17th round pick right now. And it's fine if you want to say Balky, let's just ignore him. He's a non-factor. But it's also okay if you say, hey, this is a guy we should probably be paying attention to, whether it's a Fantasy Pros draft, an FFPC Main Event, or an FFPC Best Ball or Superflex tournament draft. This is a player we should be paying attention to. How are you handling Darnell Mooney late in your drafts this year, my friend?
Yeah, I mean, this offense in general is interesting in Chicago, right? And I think for me, it just depends on where you fall on Justin Fields. If you think he's going to progress this year, bring this offense. I mean, they put in the right tools. You talk about DJ Moore, talk about a great ad. I mean, that GM should win awards for that trade in the draft. Not only did he pull the trade off and get everything he needed for that pick, he brought in the perfect complement to Justin Field, the perfect stud receiver that can come in there, command targets. It is going to help and open up the game for Mooney. You don't want Mooney being your first receiver, your number one target on the team. You talked about Kmet. For me, when I look at this offense, the guys I want are Fields, Kmet, and DJ Moore. Mm-hmm. I've got a build. I believe it's one of the BBTs, maybe the 125 with a Chicago stack right now. And yeah, I threw Mooney in, like you said. I mean, you said 17th round. Everything I'm looking at is like 13th round, which is kind of pricey for me when you're looking at Mooney. But I mean, he's given you 2 wide receiver 58 seasons. He's given you that one anomaly wide receiver 27 in 2021, which you talked about. But last year in those 12 games, he didn't give us much. You know what I mean? So we're not seeing the rapport between him and Fields. I talk about rapport often when it comes to receivers and their quarterbacks. So for me, you've got a new situation with DJ Moore. How is that rapport going to build? And then can Justin Fields support this many weapons fantasy-wise? You know, where is Mooney on the receiving shelf or ladder, you know, compared to all these other weapons? So for me, I think if his price is 17th, like you're talking about, I think it's a good.
I'm going to interrupt you. It's not. I am stupid.
Anywhere.
I don't know what I was looking at. Mooney, over the course of the last 3 days, according to Fantasy
Crazy,
Mojo,
right?
in the Fantasy Pros Championship. I know he looked like a great buy. Now maybe not so much. Wide receiver 59 at the end of the 12th round. That's where we're looking at.
And he's probably going to keep creeping up because, like you said, news of him being healthy, right? Mm-hmm. So people who are high on Fields, I think that's the people who are going to be grabbing Mooney shares. Otherwise, I mean, there's some good value here. You see Juju going right beside him in this one draft I'm looking at. I think Juju's a sleeper right now in New England. He's going to command targets. So a lot of value in the end. So for me, when you get to this part of the draft, it really depends what you did in the earlier part of the draft. And for me, I love stacking. # always be stacking. So I'm going to be looking for those stacks when I get to this part of the draft.
I can't believe it took 47 minutes for the first always be stacking draft. That's my fault.
I had to throw it in there. Come on.
I should have teed you up. I don't know why I wasn't teeing you up.
All good. It's all good. We're feeling each other out, man. It's
exactly. Yes. Yeah, exactly. Okay, let's talk about a player that is going much higher than Darnell Mooney in drafts right now, and that's DeAndre Hopkins. Now, Mike Reese, who covers the Patriots for ESPN, has said that the Titans have actually been the more aggressive team between New England and Tennessee in pursuing DeAndre Hopkins than the Patriots. Now, what's interesting about this is obviously if Hopkins goes to New England, he hurts Smith-Schuster. I wonder what happens if he goes to Tennessee, because there has been so much Treylon Burks steam up that's been going on over the last few months in the FFPC. I got to believe that he is a big loser if he ends up Burks is a big loser for all the people who have been drafting him in FFPC drafts if Hopkins goes there. Because to me, and JD, I don't know how much of a commentary this is on Hopkins, because he's wide receiver 22 at the end of the 4th round in the Fantasy Pros Championship right now. I don't necessarily see him going that much higher once he signs. I don't see him dropping that much lower once he signs. I think this is more of a commentary on players like Treylon Burks, players like Juju Smith-Schuster. This is more of a situation where we need to be wary of how much a Hopkins signing can hurt one of his teammates rather than where Hopkins is going to go in drafts, because I don't necessarily know if signing affects his ADP much.
Yeah, I mean, I like what Rich says. I've always had in the back of my mind that he ends up in KC. I could see them coming out of nowhere at the 9th hour, adding him as a weapon, because, as much as you hear Mahomes talk about Kadarius Toney today and how great he is, and we all know that Mahomes can manage, but if he has weapons, I mean, that's a whole other level, right? And Hopkins can bring that. I like him going to Tennessee. I'm a big Burks guy this year. I think Burks can really blow up, but he's alone out there. You know, you talk about narrow target tree, but it's a weak tree. You know, the tree trunk is weak, so it's like you've got Chig out there. I think it probably affects Chig more than it affects Treylon. And I mean, I think this would be good for Tannehill. We've seen Tannehill revive his career already once from going from Miami to Tennessee. This is another opportunity. You've seen Tannehill take this team to the playoffs. They have the system. They're a defensive team. Maybe they're not, as they were on the offensive line. And look, I'm not expecting this to be a firepower team, even with Hopkins. Do I love this for Hopkins? No, I don't like this for Hopkins. Do I like it for Burks? I like it in the sense that, like I said earlier, it gives me an opportunity to go buy Treylon where I maybe couldn't buy him before in Dynasty. And maybe his ADP goes down in redraft. Once Hopkins goes there, it'll for sure go down in redraft.
Do you think Hopkins' redraft ADP is affected by where he signs?
I could see him drop a little bit if he goes to Tennessee, just because.
But not go up, right?
If he goes to KC, it will go up. If he goes to KC,
Yeah,
I think it goes up. If he goes to Buffalo, it goes up. You know, if he goes one of those high power offenses where we all think that they're missing that one receiver. Just that you saw OBJ last year in LA in the playoffs. He had that one game. That's all you need from those guys, right? Especially like best ball. So yeah, I could see him ending up on a good offense, trying to maybe going after more against the championship than the money.
It's fascinating. And it's one of these things that if you're drafting right now, you got to get right. Because if you get it right, man, that is going to put you so far ahead.
You know what, Balky? I'm looking at the fourth round. And for me, the fourth round is like, that show, The Floor is Lava? My daughter loved that show. Shout out to my daughter if she's watching right now. But to me, the fourth round is like The Floor is Lava. I see guys like Debo. I see Hopkins. I see Madison. I see Calvin Ridley. I mean, all four of those guys are guys I'm trying to jump over or around those guys. I like Mixon. I love me some Kittle, love Lamar, love Christian Watson and Aaron Jones. But those four guys in the fourth round are guys that I'm avoiding.
So if we're borrowing The Floor is Lava, there are little couches and end tables and lamps to jump on and float on there. But the rest of it, man, you don't want to be touching. I get it. What an appropriate analogy. I love bringing you on, JD. This is great. Talking wide receivers here with John Daniel from the GOAT District. Darren Gant, who covers the Panthers for ESPN, thinks that Adam Thielen is going to lead Carolina in receptions. Carolina is a team in flux this year with Bryce Young taking over as the quarterback there. Obviously, no DJ Moore. You know, for a player who the head beat writer for the Panthers, at least for ESPN, thinks that is going to lead the team in receptions. Boy, the FFPC players sure aren't treating him like that. Wide receiver 58, JD, at the 12:08, right ahead of Darnell Mooney, Rashee Rice, and Tyler Boyd. Your thoughts on Adam Thielen there? Is he a value, given that he should be catching a lot of balls from Bryce Young this year?
I think roster build is probably the most important thing when you're deciding if you're going to draft Thielen or not. He's a 33-year-old receiver coming into an offense with a rookie quarterback. I mean, the weapons around him are sketchy. Will a rookie quarterback lean on a veteran tight end or receiver? We've seen it. We've seen it in Carolina. We saw it with Cam Newton. So if you are looking for immediate production in your build, or you're a contender and you're looking for depth at receiver, Thielen could be a cheap option. Am I going out and targeting him? I'm not targeting anything in this offense, to be honest, in Carolina. I get Frank Reich did well with some quarterbacks in Philly, but as a Colts fan, I didn't see him do much. And now you're asking him to be the head coach in a situation where he's got a rookie quarterback and some what's the word I'm looking for? I usually have Dan there to help me with my French. But, just some underwhelming weapons around him, in my opinion. I know they bring in Miles Sanders, and running backs have had success catching the ball under Frank Reich, but I worry about how much firepower this offense really has. I might be totally wrong, but they just don't excite me, and it's not an offense I'm I'm targeting. But like I said, Thielen, for a cheap, early season type of guy, I don't mind it.
Our mutual friend Kev Wheeler, who I know has made multiple appearances on your podcast, has already said Thielen is undervalued, and I have 0% chance.
Nice. I love Wheeler. Shout out to Kev. I saw him on your commercial there. That's great.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, he was on an ad for BSN for sure. So it's interesting here because when you look at the Carolina receivers, I think there's a lot to get excited about later on in the draft. Jonathan Mingo, Laviska Shenault, DJ Chark, Terrace Marshall, a guy that a lot of high stakes players on a couple years ago. And the more I look at it, I'm like, all these people they're all misses this year. Like they're all going to be misses for fan. Like even in best ball, I don't trust any of these guys in best ball. I'd be like, maybe somebody like Shenault, like if I was in a 28 round FFPC best ball, okay, maybe I could see some spike weeks from him. Mingo is semi-intrigued. What's funny, JD, is I was really on Mingo when Carolina drafted him. I'm like, oh God, this could be the wide receiver one of the future because it's clearly not Thielen or any of these other guys there. And then I read and I listened to what a lot of smarter people than me had to say. And I'm like, yeah, Mingo's not it. Maybe he'll be a contributor. Maybe he'll be a second guy, but he's not going to be the number one. And Mingo's a guy I was excited about, and I actually drafted in a couple of spots, but I've actually my heat on Jonathan Mingo has waned so far here. I want to get into the Houston Texans here. A couple of questions for you about the Houston Texans receivers. Tank Dell, who was drafted by the Texans this year, apparently in OTAs, according to head coach DeMeco Ryans, said that he was open a lot in OTAs. Now, this is a guy that put up insane numbers for the Houston Cougars, but it was the Houston Cougars, not exactly going up against the greatest competition in the world. He already had a friendship off the field with CJ Stroud. Obviously, CJ Stroud said, hey, go out and get me Tank Dell as far as the Texans front office goes. Robert Woods is there, or at least the corpse of Robert Woods is there. I'm not excited about him as well. But I'm looking at him in a best ball league and maybe fantasy pros late. You look at Tank Dell and the fact that the quarterback there wanted him. He looked good in OTAs. He had a really good college career. Is there something there with Nathaniel Tank Dell, JD?
So before I get into the 5'8", 165-pound, is that the same guy we're talking about?
Mm-hmm.
So
he's not a big man. He is not a big man.
The two offenses we're talking about, theoretically, when you're talking roster build, they're interesting because, like you said, you can definitely stack them late. Dan Williamson on our channel often talks about pairing up receivers late that are both going late so that you can hit at least on one of them.
Oh, okay. So
with Houston, with Carolina, that definitely works. But for me, when you're looking at a kid that's 5'8", 165, ran a 4.49, all right, that's all right. I'll go to John Mechie coming off, horrible story, but seems like he's back healthy, had leukemia, back healthy now. A little bigger, 5'11", 190. Speed-wise similar, but I really like John Mechie. I think he's maybe forgotten right now. And Nico Collins, I like to sprinkle those two around. I haven't really been big on Dell. For me, when I'm looking at rookie receivers, they often take time. So I'm usually targeting ones that are in better offenses if I'm looking for them their first year. So Dell's not necessarily a guy that I've been looking at, to be honest.
Okay, so you don't like Dell. Let's just and I know you want to talk about Mechie, and that's fine. But Nico Collins, apparently, right now I'm looking at his ADP, wide receiver 52. So he's basically a number 5 wide receiver in the Fantasy Pros Championship, going off the board right smack dab middle in the draft at the 10-12, the 11-01. And apparently, according to ESPN's DJ Bien Aim, who I'm probably butchering his name, my apologies to the Bien Aim family, he said that Stroud's favorite target in OTAs has been Nico Collins. JD, this is a guy I was on last year. I thought he was going to take a step forward. Now there's no Brandon Cooks to gum up the works, and you have a huge opportunity for Collins. For me, if Collins doesn't do it this year, he's never going to do it. But your thoughts on Mechie versus Collins, and I guess let me bring up the ADPs before you answer.
For me, it's about price, right? So you're talking about a 10th rounder in Collins. Look, if you're bullish on Houston and you believe in Stroud, and I mean, I love Stroud. I like them as a prospect. happy that my Colts ended up with AR, but I thought he was going to end up in Indy. I just like the price on Mechie better.
17th round in the Fantasy Pros Championship.
17th round. So you're talking about a 7-round difference. And then I can throw in like a Tank Dell a round or two later to grab both of them and then try to hit on one of them. If I believe in this, or I'm trying to build a stack in Houston again late, which is nice. But Alan Lazard being reunited with Rodgers is going in that range. Greg Dulcich in tight end premium, as much as I'm an Albert O guy, I like sprinkling some Dulcich in, especially if I have Russell. Again, it's always about opportunity costs for me. And the Houston offense, kind of similar to Carolina, I'm just not really bullish on. So I do have builds. Again, I do have builds where I'm trying to stack later. And those are two offenses you can definitely hit on, but it's not something I'm heavy on.
One of the more intriguing offenses in 2022 was the Minnesota Vikings. And I think they are equally as much in 2023 with a full season of TJ Hawkinson and the addition of first-round wide receiver Jordan Addison. Now, Kevin O'Connell talked about KJ Osborne, a guy who a lot of people were excited about drafting late last year, JD. According to Kevin O'Connell, he's been, quote, a real standout during offseason practices. The Vikings have been moving around. He's been moving him around. He's been playing multiple spots. And you look at Osborne, who is now coming into his 4th NFL season. He was the number 2, at least wide receiver, maybe not pass catcher, in the Minnesota offense last year. 25 catches for 325 yards and 2 touchdowns in the last 4 games for the Vikings last year, primarily playing out of the slot. He was 19th in receivers, 19th among receivers in yards per route during that 4-game stretch. Now, obviously, Addison and Hawkinson are going to be there for the full season, but he has been priced appropriately in the Fantasy Pros Championship. Again, we're talking about a late-round pick, but KJ Osborne, JD, is this a player you want to be in business with in the mid-16th round?
See, now you're talking my language, right? Houston, you've got a defensive coach coming in, a new regime. I mean, the Vikings are in year 2 of this offense, and we saw what it did last year in year 1. For me, I like to see a progressing offense, right? Especially you had Cousins. Now he's going into his 2nd year. You've got Jefferson still there. Thielen is gone, opens up the door for KJ Osborne to step up. But for me, when I look at Osborne, I'm looking at, again, I'm sectioning off my season. He's like my H1 guy, my first half guy. Addison is the guy I really want for upside and to win me a tournament. And I'm looking for him more for that second half. So depending on how you feel about Addison, yes, Osborne has an opportunity. Do you think he can beat Addison year 1? I mean, that's for you to make that decision. I personally think Addison will eventually outplay him. So when I'm looking at the first quarter, first half of the season, I like Osborne to fill my roster where it makes sense. But Addison is really where I think the targets are going to end up when you're looking at the second half of the season.
What about, and Kev Wheeler's talking about Addison is completely replacing the Adam Thielen targets. He thinks KJ Osborne is going to be
because you have TJ Hawk there.
Right, exactly. And I guess the thing I would bring up, let's just talk about Addison versus Osborne here. You're talking about an 8-round difference where Addison is going in the early 8th, but you can get Osborne in the mid-16th. Does draft capital figure into this equation at all?
Well, it does, and it kind of makes it interesting if you're doing like a best ball build, right? Because you can grab both and then stack them with Cousins, even whether you have Jefferson or not. I mean, that's, again, this offense likes to throw the ball. They're going to put up points, and that's not going to change this year. And their defense might even be worse this year, so they'll probably throw it even more, right? And these 3 receivers are definitely going to benefit. You've got Dalvin Cook leaving. I don't think Madison is necessarily going to come in and be Dalvin Cook, so I think they lean more on the aerial game. I mean, look, you're in Green Bay, man. You know this division better than I do. Where do you think this receiver core ends up?
Yeah, interesting that you bring this up because, and Rich Bilyeu is pointing this out, Minnesota threw more than 700 passes last year. Minnesota had the opportunity to bring back Dalvin Cook this year. They chose
and in a
not
dome.
to.
Yeah, Rich is on fire, man.
And they play in a dome. They play in a dome as well. So you look at this situation here. Madison, as Rich points out, he's not a grinder. You know, we've been kind of racking our brain, maybe not racking our brains, but we spent a lot of time trying to figure out the guy behind the guy in Minnesota. behind Madison? Is it going to be Chandler? Is it going to be McBride? All these guys that they have there. And I think, and I can't remember who pointed this out on Twitter, but somebody said, like, look, Minnesota is telling us that they don't care about the running game this year. They care about Kirk Cousins pumping the ball, the Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson, and KJ Osborne. That's what matters on this offense. And I think they are going to ball out. Now, they do need to run the ball to a certain point. Yeah. I don't think the point they will be running to is something we should be getting excited about for fantasy purposes. Who was I just talking to? Some high-stakes player was talking about this. Alexander Madison, running back 19 at the 509. Way too high. They don't want to have anything to do with that. And that seems to be a popular sentiment. And I think his ADP is going to go down because people are going to realize this Vikings offense goes with the receivers. I want to be in business with Justin Jefferson, even if I have the 101. I want to be in business with TJ Hawkinson. He's going to catch a lot more passes this year, too, because he's going to have a full season in Minnesota as opposed to splitting it between Detroit and Minnesota. Osborne's fine for best ball for me, like as a flyer late. And I, honest to God, I have not been drafting a whole lot of Addison. I'm still nervous about his size in the NFL and how he's going to deal with the bigger corners. We saw him crush it with Pitt in 2021, and then in 2022 with the Heisman Trophy winner, took a step back there. So I do have some misgivings there. Maybe they're wrong.
It's definitely tougher in redraft.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so I think, like, for me, I am more, I guess the conservative approach that I'm taking here is give me Hawkinson, give me Jefferson. After that, I'll sprinkle it around because I don't feel super, super great about any of the other skill position guys in the Vikings this year.
Just to add on your point earlier, Minnesota was third last in rushing percentage plays, and that was with Dalvin Cook.
Yeah, boy, that's big. That is a good stat right there. And Rich is pointing this out too. The Netflix, I think I haven't seen it yet, but I think it's called
watch that. Yeah.
Is it called Quarterback? JD,
yes.
Is that what it's called?
Yes.
And the first episode came out, and Rich says he's learning the offense. He's going to be better this year. Yeah, I'd be on board with drafting Kirk Cousins this year as my starting quarterback if I double tap it and go with somebody else right after that. And maybe I don't have to this year. Cousins could actually be a lot better than a lot of people are thinking. I feel like this show has been a lot better than a lot of people are thinking it was going to be. Or maybe not, because they knew JD was going to be on, so they knew it was going to be awesome. I could be wrong there. We have, I want to put a bow on hour number 1 here. When we come back for hour number 2, we got a lot to quiz JD about. We're going to put him on the soapbox, ask him where he stands on players that we've touched on already tonight. Guys like Kendre Miller, who we said we're going to get to, a guy I feel like I missed the boat on in my Dynasty drafts. We'll get into that as well. And then we'll also talk a little bit about mid-round running back targets and fades. Who are the running backs after the big guys are off the board? You could make the case that these are the dead zone running backs. Who are the dead zone running backs you want to have on your squad? That's all coming up in the second hour here on the Better Sports Network. This is the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show. John Daniel from the GOAT District, Eric Balkman from the FFPC. We'll be right back after this.
The High Stakes Fantasy Football Show with Eric Balkman.
What can we expect for you out there on the track tonight?
Listen, I have a wife, 2 kids. I have, full-time jobs. I'm never nervous. I don't even know what that word means. Can you explain what nervous means? No. I'm ready to have fun. I've never done anything like this before. I got asked to be a part of this. This is fascinating. Like, it's so cool to just look around and see what goes on here. So I'm just excited to get out on the horse. And you want trash talk? Is that what you're asking me for? No trash talk. I hope everyone does well.
All right. Everyone's going to do well, but it has to be a winner. So give me your trifecta. Who's going to come in first, second, and third? Heat.
I will go Maria 1, me 2, Willie 3, Moose goes 4th.
Well, it's very simple. I won this event last year. I won my heat, and so the defending champ has to be the favorite. Now, that makes me a little nervous just because I feel like it's hard to repeat. There's a little pressure when you're the favorite, but that being said, I'm still optimistic.
So your heat, it's you,
yes.
Moose and Keith from Better Sports Network, and Willie Colon.
I think Keith might be my stiffest competition, and I asked for this because I actually recruited Keith, if you didn't know. So Keith, if you win, you're welcome.
Malusis is very good. I mean, he knows what he's doing, but I'm going to go with Maria.
Keith is waving to the crowd. He must pay attention because they're off. It's Mark Malusis going for the lead. Maria Marino on the outside, and now Keith Irizarry on the outside with speed, and they're 3 wide into the first turn. Mark Malusis is locked in for his life. 138-2. They're into the stretch. Sportscasters Derby 2. And still in front, Keith Irizarry. And now Mark Malusis is trying to squeeze on through.
Come on! Back! Come on! Let's go! Come on, dig it! Dig it! Yeah!
Keith Irizarry. Keith, you did it all the way, wire to wire, over Mark Malusis.
Awesome! That was so cool! The champ is here! Keith, what was it like being out there? Adrenaline rush, you were doing the Instagram Live, so there was no panic. You looked cool, calm, collected the whole time, and you won it.
I felt really comfortable. I did. Like, I know you were joking with me before. Are you nervous? Are you whatever? What are you? David, the driver, was awesome. He's like, we're going to win this. I said, all right, let's win this. And he said, let's go. Yeah, I just felt really comfortable. I did. It was fun. We're in the lead. I got Maria Marino on the right side of me, and I'm like, oh, my gosh, she's going to beat us, right? And then out of nowhere, you see Moose coming up this way, and we feel him breathing down our neck. And I'm like,
Moose
no!
on the loose. Watch out.
Moose was definitely on the loose, and we just got Moose by a neck, a nose, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, but again, all of this for a great cause, and it was absolutely awesome to do this. It was cool.
All right, Keith, congratulations, and no matter what, you could always hold this over Moose's head.
Yeah!
It's the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on Better Sports Network.
8:11 in the PM on the East Coast, which means it is high stakes fantasy football time on the Better Sports Network. Don't go anywhere at the top of the hour. Garrett Price and the Dynasty Nerds are going to take you on a fantastic voyage through Dynasty fantasy football throughout July and August here, and what you should be doing with your teams. And speaking of which, by the way, if you're looking to play fantasy football 365 days a year, Dynasty startup drafts are going on right now at myffpc.com. They start at the $100 level. They go all the way up to the $5,000 level. Remember, we've been doing Dynasty for over a decade at the FFPC. We have well over 1,300 plus teams. Not a single one has ever folded. So if you're worried about anything, be it shady commissions, players that want to just dump after 1 year or 2 years and get out, or the league folding, you don't have to worry about that. Remember to register at myffpc.com. Speaking of Dynasty leagues, and JD, I'm talking with John Daniel tonight, my guest co-host from the GOAT District, at JD GOAT District on Twitter, at GOAT District on Twitter. I drafted, I'm trying to think how many Dynasty leagues I'm in now. I think it's like 7. And I whiffed, not that I was targeting him, but I whiffed on every single draft in getting Kendre Miller this year. And the deeper we go into drafting season, the more I'm regretting it. And I know you're a Kendre Miller fan. He's running back 46 in the Fantasy Pros Championship right now at the end of the 11th round. I want you to talk a little bit about him from both standpoints. Number one, from redraft. He's in the backfield, same backfield as Alvin Kamara, who we talked about in the first hour, and then obviously Jamal Williams. But as far as Dynasty goes too, what should you be doing now if you're a dunce like me and missed on Miller? What kind of offers should you be making for Kendre Miller in your Dynasty leagues right now?
Well, the problem now is the news worked against you, right? In the sense that you know that there's a suspension looming. We don't know what that suspension is. So do you try to go after him prior to the suspension, or do you wait to see how long it is? Mm-hmm. Right? Because the higher the suspension is, the more expensive Kendre is going to be. It gives him an opportunity. We saw Kamara, you don't have to go farther than New Orleans. We saw Kamara take advantage. I remember they brought in Adrian Peterson. They had, what's his name? Mark Ingram.
Yep.
Right? And then they brought in Kamara, and everyone's like, there's no way Kamara's going to be relevant year one. And he smashed because talent comes through. These teams want to win now. They're going to put the best players out there. Kendre Miller comes off of a 1,400-yard season. Like, one thing for me, Balky, in fantasy is if you showed me you did it, I'm going to believe you. Mm-hmm. This whole upside thing where you've never done it, I'm over all of that. Like, tight end position I talk about often, that's why I don't invest in rookie tight ends. I'll pay the price for a Kelsey. I'll pay for a Kittle when I know they're going to smash for me, right? Running back, you're looking for talent. You're looking for proven. This guy's proved it. And progression. You look at his career in college, he's progressed every year in the receiving game, in the rushing game. There's something about when you watch him play, and sometimes it's not, I don't have a great stat for you or anything, but there's certain guys when I see him play, something kind of, and he's one of the guys when I started watching his tape and just seeing what he can do. I think he can be an all-around workhorse. He had 224 touches in his last season in college. So look, we talk about New Orleans. We don't know what this offense is going to look like. They have a new quarterback. They have everything, a whole new situation there. He could come in with Kamara out and just take over that backfield right away.
It's one of those things where when I'm in a draft and I see Kendre Miller on the board in the middle part of the draft, 11th round, whatever it is, and I'm like, this is exactly the type of player. When I look back on my team and the way the NFL season went, this is exactly the type of player I will go back and say, God, why didn't I draft him in the 10th round? Why didn't I take him in the 11th round? And obviously with Kamara and Williams, it kind of clouds you right now. But I think there's a non-zero chance of anything. There's a non-zero chance that Kendre Miller is the Saints running back to own, and maybe more than a non-zero chance. He could actually be the favorite to be the guy that you want to own in that backfield when you consider that Jamal Williams is coming off the career year. What do Cecil Lammey and Sigmund Bloom always say from football guys? Beware the career year. And that's what we had with Williams last year.
Exactly.
And Kamara, we talked about this earlier in the show. Like, it's not like he was crushing it at the end of last season from an athletic standpoint, from a number standpoint. He did not look like capital letter Alvin Kamara. So I think there's a lot to be said for Kendre Miller here.
And when you, again, the words I keep saying, opportunity costs. I mean, he's going right beside Zeke, right, Eric? So if you're playing a big tournament and you want to win some cash, you need upside, man. You need these guys to hit. Is Zeke going to hit no matter where he goes? Is he really going to hit? I don't see it. To me, he last year just looked like he was done. Like he's ready to just block for a quarterback, maybe roll his way to a championship. I'd way rather have the upside of a guy like Kendre, like I said, who's shown volume in college. He looks like a 3-down guy and has an opportunity in offense where there's a lot of uncertainty. You got to look for uncertainty. That's what I look for, and that's where I like to pounce. And Kendre is a guy who's definitely pounced on. I think you can go out and get him. I would go get him before he pops. That's the other thing in Dynasty. Go see what he costs, and he's the type of guy where you can work a deal out and kind of get him, as a side piece almost.
And JD, I don't know if you have this reputation, but in like not the local, but like the private Dynasty leagues I play in, I think I have a reputation for hosting fantasy football podcasts. So if I come out of the blue and I say, hey, what do you think of Kendre Miller? All of a sudden the red flags, the alarm bells are going off with the guy I'm trading. Oh, I don't want to trade him. I'm going to keep him and see what happens. It's one of those things. You saw Django Unchained, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So like when King Schultz and Django are talking about how do we get Hildy back from Calvin Candy, you can't just come up and say, hey, I'm interested in acquiring this servant that you have that happens to speak German.
Exactly.
You have to come up there. You have to ask for the whole thing.
Exactly.
And that's what I think it is. Like you have to structure a deal, like a big deal, and then just have Kendre Miller as a throw-in. So you end up changing a lot of moving parts on your squad, but you get Kendre Miller as the throw-in.
So I'm in sales, right? And sales applies to a lot. It's kind of like poker, right? It applies to a lot. And when I'm making trade proposals, it's similar to when I'm trying to get a deal done. What I offer my client, I'm usually giving them options, but I'm making the option I want them to pick the most attractive, right?
Right.
And that's basically what you got to do when you send out proposals. Dan and I on the Owners Lounge, we do this often. We put 8 proposals the other week together. We're giving owners options. You know what I mean? Like maybe you don't like the deal with this guy in it. There's this guy who's a similar type player, similar value. So here's like 2 or 3 offers, that are similar. So there's ways to kind of manipulate trades and kind of Kendre is that kind of piece where he's not hot yet. We haven't seen him, burst through the line in preseason or anything yet. So I think if you're going to buy him and like yourself, you don't have any shares, now's a good time to go get him.
Feel like he's one of those wood-fired pizza joints, right? Where he's like the third pizza about to go into the fire, and you want to get him right now before he's hot and fresh and ready out of the oven when everybody wants to eat him. Weird analogy, but I think that's fine. All right. So Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon is the next guy I want to talk about here. A guy I just drafted in the 5th round of the Scott Fish Bowl, a tournament that I know you're in, JD, as well. He slipped and he slipped and he slipped, and finally, like, you know what? I'm trying to beat out thousands and thousands of other teams. I'll take a chance on him in the 5th. We have not heard any updates on Joe Mixon and his situation in Cincinnati in darn near 2 weeks now. Paul Dehner, who covers the Bengals for The Athletic, said that all sides would prefer resolution sooner rather than later. That's not really news. Obviously, we know this in regards to the Joe Mixon contract situation. Now, Dehner points out that the true deadline for this is prior to week 1 of the NFL season when the salaries become guaranteed. But he also points out Bengals probably want to know before that. The Bengals have Travion Williams. They have Chase Brown, a guy I did draft in a lot of dynasty leagues because I felt like he was going way too late in my rookie drafts. So I'm excited for Brown. But at the same time, like, I got to understand, like, Joe Mixon is a special talent. Currently, he is still on one of the best offenses in the NFL. I'm going to take the chance on him there. Now, he has fallen in the Fantasy Pros Championship ADP right now to running back 16. He's going currently at the end of the 4th round. I'm still on board with Mixon there. Your thoughts on how you handle Mixon in high-stakes drafts right now, JD?
Yeah, Mixon is your perfect 0 RB type of guy where he's, I mean, the ideal running back you want in a good offense. You want him to have the bulk of the volume. And I mean, there's going to be probably no higher powered offense this year than Cincinnati with Burrow, Chase, T. Higgins there. You name the guys that are behind Mixon, and that's another thing that I look at, the depth chart. I mean, Brown is fun and all, and he's a nice cheap piece you can add. But you're talking about a 5th rounder. I talked about Evan Hall earlier. To me, when a team invests a 5th round to come in to be the backup, it's because they really believe in the guy at the front. Mm-hmm. They'll renegotiate his contract. He'll come in for a cheaper contract. He knows what makes sense for him. To me, Mixon is a great draft right now. He's a great value in drafts where he's going. Whether you want to draft him as your first running back, you talk about the fishbowl. I'm on the clock right now in the 7th. He went in the 4th round on a team that's got 4 running backs in 6 rounds. So they've got Barkley, who we talked about. They got Breece Hall, who we talked about. They got Joe Mixon. So we're only missing Kenneth Walker to talk about for his roster. But no.
By the way, those are my 2 first running backs I drafted in the Scott Fish Bowl was Breece Hall and Joe Mixon.
Nice. I actually checked out your team earlier.
Oh, you did? Oh, okay. All right.
I figured maybe we'll talk. Last night we were trying not to talk fishbowl, but it became like a joke because Dan's not in the fishbowl. So
he's not.
It up. He's not. He's.
I gotta have a conversation with Scott Fish. We gotta get Dan Williams into the fishbowl.
It's a thing.
Unless he has no interest in it, which I would get too.
He kind of feels that it's selective in who's included. You know what I mean?
And a little bit, yeah.
I think he would prefer if people were just all kind of included somehow, and maybe that's why he doesn't necessarily go out and ask to be in the
campaign.
I don't want to speak for Dan or anything, but right. I just mean that he has his, he's got his reasons. But I'm sure if he wanted to be in, he's been in the past. I'm pretty sure.
Okay, all right. Well, fair enough there. We'll see how that goes. I'm actually. I'm on the ends here. So in my draft, I had to wait. Stefania Bell from ESPN she had the first pick and I had the last pick. So with the 3RR, I felt like I was waiting forever to draft because she was, God knows what she's doing to ESPN. I'm sure she's on the air all the time. So I know she has a busy life. I'm like, come on. All I want to do is draft Tyreek Hill. And then she took Tyreek Hill and I had to settle for CeeDee Lamb.
You gotta get her on the show now if you've.
Yeah, obviously, yeah. I'll DM her right now. I'll text her. Nice. She and I, we drink wine out in the California area all the time. Okay.
She seems like a beer girl. Not just.
I think she's wine.
Is she really?
I think because she lives out in. Not that I want to turn this into the Stefania Bell hour here, but I believe she lives in. Well, I shouldn't say she lives. I think she lives in Bristol. I could be wrong about that, but I think she's from. Northern California, so I think she's big into the wine.
Yeah,
I could be wrong. Don't quote me on that.
That makes sense.
But yeah, I'll take her out for beer, whatever she wants, and we could talk about why she's been on the clock so long. Okay, Tyler Boyd. Let's talk about keeping on the Bengals tip. Tyler Boyd is a guy that I think gets forgotten about in this Bengals offense. We just talked about Joe Mixon. Obviously, T. Higgins, Jamar Chase. Yes. We don't need to tell you to take those guys early. But when you talk about the other pass catchers in this offense, I know a lot of people, I can't bring up on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour on Fridays, I can't bring up Irv Smith because my co-host Farrell Elliott is so sick of me bringing up Irv Smith all the time. We're not going to talk about him. But Tyler Boyd is a guy that I think is somebody we have not talked a lot about. Wide receiver 61 in the Fantasy Pros Championship. It puts him into the 13th round. And this is a player, if Higgins were to go down, if Chase were to go down, anything like that, all of a sudden Boyd looks, and Farrell Elliott is literally calling me right now. I wonder if he's watching this program. He's literally calling me on my phone right now. That's really weird. But I look at Tyler Boyd here in the 13th round. This is a player that, for best ball, yes. But if he ends up being the beneficiary of an injury in that offense, JD, my God, Boyd could really hit it off.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about Boyd is, yeah, he's late, and you're usually filling those holes I talk about. You want him to fill a bye week in a best ball, or you throw him in your lineup if your top guy's out. Is he's able to give you a wide receiver 2 week, a wide receiver 5 week. He did it last year. He was wide receiver 2 against Atlanta, week 7. He was wide receiver 5. This is in the playoffs, so that probably doesn't matter. But it's just to show you, like you talked about, there's the injury possibility. There's always one of those guys hurts. I hate to say it because I love that offense. I've got one dynasty team with Burrow, Chase, T. Higgins, and I keep Boyd around for that reason, because there's always one of them out, and that's where Boyd's value goes up, and that's when you can start throwing him in your lineup if he's replacing an injury. I love him in a best ball when you're doing a Cincy stack. Somebody mentioned, is that Rich again talking about Hurst? Hurst is a nice late round, especially in tight end premium, but that's pretty much what he is for me, for Boyd.
And it's weird because obviously I joined a dynasty dispersal draft where I took over an orphan, and there is dispersal draft between the two teams that were orphan, and I got Tyler Boyd, and I was very excited about him. And then since then, T. Higgins has been added to the Bengals. Jamar Chase has been added to the Bengals. So he's done it. Like, he can do it. He's just got to be given that opportunity. But as you pointed out, as long as those guys stay healthy, it's going to be very difficult for him to do that.
And then he's going like around a guy like Mims, right? In Denver, who just has, like, I said, on one side, he can give you those top 5 receiver, but how often is that happening? Whereas Mims has a possibility to take over that, being the receiver, if not the number 2, at some point this season. So for me, I rather go in the upside with Mims, depending on the build.
I am darn near 100% positive that Marvin Mims is going in the 15th round right now. That dude might shoot up into the 10th round by the time early September rolls around. I think there is so much heat on him, and people are going to start waking up when they start waking up to fantasy football drafts, which obviously on this show, you've been doing them all year round. But when tourist season starts, people are going to be like, oh, Marvin Mims. I got to get him.
He has that DJ Moore, Elijah Moore feel where, like, he's just slowly heating up, and it's going to get more and more as you get closer to the season. So another guy that if you believe in, you want to pounce on him now because, like you said, he's probably going to move up.
Quentin Johnston, speaking of players that are playing behind a couple of studs like Tyler Boyd and Marvin Mims are right now. Quentin Johnston, wide receiver 43 at the 810. We had Remy LeBeau on, who is a FFPC drafter. He's been on a couple of our live broadcasts when we've had, including this show, when we broadcast a live Fantasy Pros Championship draft. And he was talking about Quentin Johnston being one of his favorite receivers in that 8th, 9th round area. How have you been handling the rookie out of TCU, knowing he's going to be going to a high-powered offense, but he's got Keenan Allen and Mike Williams in front of him?
Yeah, redraft, it's hard for me to get away from Allen and Williams if I'm going for some kind of Herbert build in a best ball, or I'm just trying to get some LA Charger players on my team. I didn't like him coming in as a prospect. The thing is, though, when we look at Jahan Dotson last year, as soon as a receiver gets a round 1 draft capital, it's hard to ignore him completely. So as much as I'm not investing in Quentin often in redraft, in Dynasty, I do want I want to share here and there. because the opportunity is definitely there. He's closer to Mike Williams to me than he is Keenan Allen. The problem with Williams is he's hurt, right? I mean, you talk about contested catch. The guy looks like a beast if he could stay on the field. We could have a season where these two receivers stay healthy, and Allen and Williams, right? They're both coming off season. I mean, Herbert didn't have any weapons last year other than Akers. So, I mean, I like Quentin coming in. I like the situation for him. I don't necessarily like the prototype of receiver, but I could see why people are into it. The problem for me, you mentioned Eric is 8th round. Is that what you said?
Yes, 8th round.
Again, opportunity costs. I mean, there's James Cook and Gabe Davis are two guys I love. I know it's not a popular take with Gabe Davis, but I think one or both of those guys are going to pop in Buffalo this year. I think that offense has to change. I talked about Antonio Gibson earlier, DeAndre Swift, JSN is there, who I prefer to Johnson, especially year one, even though they're similar in the sense that they both have two studs ahead of them, right?
Yeah. And I guess like that's my thing. Like we're always looking for the guy behind the guy for running backs. And I feel like within the last few years, the guy behind the guys at wide receiver has become sort of chic, like a chic pick, like with, talk about Boyd, talk about Mims, talk about Johnston. These are all guys that you're not paying a top 3 round, price to get them on your team. Obviously, why would you? But if you can get them at a decent price, and especially in Los Angeles, man, like the Chargers have been snake bit by injuries so much over the last decade. And Mike Williams, no stranger to the trainer's table. Keenan Allen has had knee issues. Obviously, he had that weird, was it a kidney or pancreas or spleen or something he had a couple of years ago? Yeah. And it opened up something.
He always has these freak.
It's a freak injuries. Yeah.
It's not like he's, people say he's injury prone, but it's actually, but a guy I didn't mention that Rich mentions, like I said, Rich is on fire tonight. Yeah. Elijah Moore is going right beside him in the fantasy pros I'm looking at right now. I'd way rather take Elijah Moore, who could be the number 2 in an offense in an ascending, Deshaun Watson offense.
Right.
Whereas Quentin John's got 2 guys to kind of battle for, and the opportunity might be a bit less first year.
And we always talk about, again, we go back to opportunity with running backs. We don't often talk about it with receivers, where talent often shows through more than anything else. But when you talk about Elijah Moore versus Quentin Johnston, where they're basically going at the same spot, and yeah, the Chargers offense is a little bit better. But to me, what trumps that is Elijah Moore could be the number 2. Forget number 2 receiver. He could be the number 2 pass catcher on that team. Great. And that's what makes him so much more valuable there than Quentin Johnston. Okay, we got to fly through these last couple. So Pat Freiermuth, I want to talk to you a little bit about here tonight. A guy that he's never been a polarizing type player, but I feel like more and more people are either stumping for him or saying he's a wasted pick at this point this year. Tight end 9 in the Fantasy Pros Championship ADP. He's going at that 7-8 turn, right behind Evan Engram, right ahead of another Cleveland Brown. We were just talking about Elijah Moore. He's going right ahead of David Njoku. How many shares have you grabbed with Freiermuth this season? What should we expect from him catching passes from Kenny Pickett, knowing that George Pickens is ready to take a step forward? Deontay Johnson's still there as well.
I like Freiermuth as a player. Theo Greminger, huge fan of the Muth on our channel, especially last year. The problem for me is the opportunity costs. I think on our channel, and we're all very similar in the sense that we're either getting a stud. I love getting me a stud like a Mark Andrews with Lamar, or whether it's Kittle, Kelsey, especially in 10 and preems. Otherwise, I'm waiting. And Freiermuth is going in that range where, unless it's Waller and he's kind of fallen a bit, or he fits my build, it's hard for me to take Freiermuth there because I like so many other guys at the running back and receiver position. I'm trying to pull up the draft board as I'm talking here. But
you're looking at, like, I can tell you by the ADP, like, as far, I told you about the tight ends, but receivers going there: Jahan Dotson, Kadarius Toney,
exactly,
JSN, Pickens, Addison, Cooks,
and the running backs. We talked about Gibson, James Cook. We talked a bit about Kamara, AJ Dillon. You're in Green Bay. I mean, he could easily pop this year. I know we've waited the last few years and people keep getting burned, but he could easily pop there now that you've got a new quarterback, a new situation in Green Bay. The one place I do like Freiermuth is if I do end up grabbing Pickett, I do like Pickett, especially in Superflex, or if I'm building like a strong receiver RB team in a 1 QB and I'm maybe going Pickett. I don't mind that because I do think that offense has a bit of juice. I like Harris. I like Pickett. So I love stacking in tight end premium my quarterback with a tight end. Mm-hmm. So if I do have Pickett, I'm looking for Freiermuth. But honestly, Eric, I just find in drafts, I'm just usually missing him because he's going, ahead of where I want to grab him.
So what about, I mean, like that's sort of the reverse stack, right? Where if you get Freiermuth, then you look at, especially in a best ball, you look at Pickett later on, right?
Oh, yes, exactly.
Okay.
That's what's nice about those, because usually you don't want to grab the quarterback and then miss on the receiver, right? So it's nice when you can grab the quarterback and then kind of pick and choose grab your stud tight end, and then you're gonna, all you got to do is reach like half a round for that quarterback. You know what I mean? It's easier than the player, I find, anyways.
So let me ask you this. This is not on the rundown, but I've noticed this and watching Darren Armani's tweets. And we've seen such success, especially in 2022, with the Mahomes-Kelsey stack, right? And now it seems like with the FFPC, we rolled out our main event slow drafts about a week and a half or so ago. And so many people have Mahomes-Kelsey stacks already. Yeah. What do you do when you're trying to beat out thousands of other teams for $1 million grand prize? What do you do when so many other teams have loaded up on that? Does that still hold value for you to try to get a valuable stack like that, what it was in 2022, or because so many people have it already, has it lost its luster for you in drafts?
I think it's one of those, I'm always looking at percentages, like how much do I want this to be part of my portfolio? Mm-hmm. You don't want to completely miss on the Mahomes-Kelsey stack if you can build it. Whether it's FFPC or underdog, there are scenarios where it just works for whatever reason. You grab Kelsey, Mahomes falls, and you can make that work. Mm-hmm. To me, what the secret to what you said are two guys, and it's either Mark Andrews with Lamar, or for me, the biggest weapon to battle those guys is George Kittle. George Kittle is the beast that doesn't get the respect he deserves. He's the Kelsey slayer. I mean, he's my favorite player in the NFL just as a player. I just love everything about him. But he's established in an offense that's run by a genius in Shanahan. And he's always going to be part of it. Yes, is he better when Debo's not around? Is he better around when, yeah, for sure. But we've seen in that offense, I talked about that today with someone, especially the running back position in a Shanahan offense is often injured. Guys often get injured. You have to take a lot of physical abuse as an offensive player in this offense. So guys get hurt. To me, the Mahomes, the Mahomes-Kelsey slay is either you go Lamar, Andrews, or you go with Kittle, whether you believe in Purdy or however you want to stock that.
Mm-hmm. My buddy Barney Newkirk is in the YouTube chat right now. Is Purdy going to be the guy throwing to Kittle, or for you, doesn't it matter?
That's interesting. Well, we talked about Billy Musio earlier. He mm-hmm. called Purdy a long time ago. He's the closest thing I know to the 49ers. Yep. So I got to go with what he's saying. With, like you said, we do it on the Go District. I bring guys that know more than me. That's why. Yep. That's how you get better, right? So for me, I'll take what Billy's saying with regards to Purdy being the guy. Interesting that we're seeing Barney talk about Lance being courted by the Falcons, because you wonder, right? Like, what are all those weapons in Atlanta going to pop? We saw Purdy run this offense well. The one thing I heard, and now I hate not giving credit if I hear something, but something about how, there's a new on PFF, there's a new series, and they talk about like some of the new regime of coaches, and they talk about Shanahan. Oh man, total brain fart. And how, you know what? I'll come back to it, Balky.
I wish I would have seen this.
Go check it out. So it's a podcast series. It's a lady that does it from PFF, and it's really, really good because it gets into the coaching tree of the Shanahan tree. Talks mm-hmm. about like McVay, LaFleur, and just how those guys were just super competitive, and how they used to compete with trying to get plays inserted into the game plan through Shanahan, and how Shanahan used to like question them. And okay, so if you want to do this play, what if this happens? What if this happens? So just talking about the genius behind Shanahan. Yeah. Anyways, if you guys get a chance, check it out. I just listened to the first part. It's kind of like a short series, but I think it's definitely a good listen.
I'm looking at it right now. Is it Sam Monson and Steve Palazzolo? This could be, because I know the series you're talking about.
Yeah, I'll pull it up
where
right.
it's all, because I know, like in Northeast Wisconsin, people were talking about it because LaFleur was going to be on it. I could be wrong on that. I'll check it out.
All of them are on there. They all make an appearance. McVay, Shanahan, even what's his name? Oh man, who's the other quarterback? The opposite Luck, played for Washington. Wow,
Played for Washington.
the running quarterback. He's a commentator now.
Robert Griffin.
Yes,
Jesus.
Robert Griffin.
We're both having brain farts at the same time. Anthony Rivera coming through in the
later it gets in the night, Balky. I get up early, man. The later it is, the more brain farts you get.
I do way too much radio on Thursdays. That's what I've learned from this. All right, let's fly through this last one. Where do you stand on Geno Smith? And I guess this is a two-part question. JD, is Geno Smith going to duplicate what he did last year when he was comeback player of the year? And is there a Geno Smith this year that you can get later on, or perhaps off the waiver wire the first couple of weeks of the season, that could really help you out?
That's a great question. I'm going to go to your boy out in Green Bay. I think Jordan Love. I love Jordan Love. He's probably my most owned quarterback on the FFPC.
Wow.
Sometimes you got to look beyond the player, and Green Bay, I mean, you would attest to this, just a great organization. LaFleur's a super smart guy. They've been grooming this guy, similar to Rodgers. Like, he sat on the sideline, he absorbed, he got a lot of reps in practice. He's coming in prepared, and he's coming in with a chip on his shoulder. I really like what Jordan Love has as weapons around him. I like Watson in Green Bay. I like the rookies that they brought in, and even Dubs, his second year, he showed flashes last year, come in injured. So this year's Geno for me is probably Jordan Love. I really like him. I like what they did for Geno in Seattle, the weapons they brought in. I think people are getting a little too bullish on Charbs. I talked about it earlier. These teams, especially running teams, they want depth, man. Like, they had Carson, what's his name? Carson, the running back in Seattle back in the day. Chris Carson. He was often injured, right? They had Penny there. He was often injured. They're not just going to run with Walker and be like, oh, this is our guy. We don't need anyone else behind him. So for me, people I think are getting a little too excited with Charbs. For me, it's an opportunity to jump on Walker. But they bring in JSN. So they clearly want to throw the ball. They already have Lockett. They already have Metcalf. I just know that Geno can take that next step this year. Did we already see, like we talked about earlier with Jamal, did we already see the best Geno, or is he going to move forward? I think that's for the drafter to kind of to decide. For me, it's all about cost. That's how I decide where I'm going to get Geno. I know people are shying away from Metcalf. Lockett seems to be the preferred guy, especially coming off of last year, the value he provided. But I'll say this to fantasy land, especially FFPC players, tight end premiums, don't sleep on Fant. I mean, Noah Fant is a talented tight end. I know last year was there was Disley there and a couple other scrubs. I could see Fant just coming out of nowhere and being significant in tight end premium.
You mentioned Fant, and then don't forget that Seattle invested that first-round pick in the Jackson Smith and Jigba, and the fact that Geno Smith is still only going as quarterback 15 in the 13th round of Fantasy Pros championship drafts. To me, that's a price that I'm still on. Like, if he misses, oh well.
100%.
You have Jared Goff behind him. You have Aaron Rodgers behind him. Russell Wilson. All three of those guys I like this year in case he misses.
Yes. The only thing I'll point out is we did see kind of like a really good first half, and then it kind of tapered a bit in the second half, if I remember correctly. I might be wrong. I hope I'm not wrong now.
No, he slowed down. He slowed down,
right, compared to the beginning of the season. So that's the only thing that worries me. Like, our defense is kind of catching up on, RG3. There we go. Anthony's coming in to save the day. Thanks, buddy.
Yes, thank God.
Nice.
And by the way, I found it. It's from The Athletic.
The Athletic. What did I say?
You said PFF, which is what was throwing me up. Jordan Rodriguez, who I believe covers, I think she mostly does Ram stuff for The Athletic, but I could be wrong. But it's called The Play Callers, and it's Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay, LaFleur, Mike McDaniel, Robert Saleh, Zach Taylor, Brandon Staley, Kevin O'Connell. They were all interviewed for this. So
yeah, it's very good. Very good.
All right. Now that we're done promoting that, let's promote the rest of the show. We are going to fly through this last segment. You don't want to go anywhere. We're talking about, everybody knows the stud running backs. What about the running backs in the dead zone that you need to be focusing on here in the FFPC Main Event, the Fantasy Pros Championship? He is John Daniel from the GOAT District, at JD GOAT District, at GOAT District on Twitter. I am Eric Balkman from the FFPC. We'll wrap things up with a really spirited running back discussion right after this on the Better Sports Network.
The High Stakes Fantasy Football Show with Eric Balkman.
So let's get into some best ball philosophy here.
Yeah.
In your experience, going back many, many, many years, drafting in national tournaments, Bradley, have you historically been shying away from the running back position in favor of wide receivers? In favor of, if you're drafting in the FFPC tight end premium format, in favor of tight ends as well? Is that the smart play when you're drafting this early in the drafting season?
Yeah, so taking value is going to be huge, and looking at like running backs and wide receivers, like you want to take a look at how the structure is. So you mentioned earlier the FFPC has a couple different types, like they've got super flex and one quarterback, so that's going to change your strategy a little bit if you have only 2 wide receivers or if you're drafting 3 wide receivers. And of course, the PPR is a different aspect compared to other formats or other tournaments. And so keeping in mind the pass catching upside of some of the running backs may be more valuable in those formats. So the Austin Ecklers, the Christian McCaffreys may be more value because they get more receptions, and so like I loved taking late shots a couple years ago on like the JD McKissicks of the world, who would get 50 receptions really cheaply. So that's something to consider. But when it comes to like overall value, like you're in the middle of a draft and you just notice that, I don't know, maybe it's Chris Godwin has fallen 14 spots, but Chris Godwin was not in your plans to be drafting. Like maybe you don't have a strong player take on Chris Godwin, or my take is that I don't think the Bucs are going to be particularly good this year. But for him to be dropping, let's say 14 spots is more than a full round. And based on the data that we've seen, if you get to draft a player more than 12 spots ahead or behind ADP, so they drop 12 or more spots, you have an 84% edge over the rest of the tournament players who are drafting this player, because typically this player isn't going to drop. The average draft position is a really strong indicator of where a player is going to go. And I think that is also on the flip side. If you are reaching too much, you're giving up value in your drafts. And so when it comes to value-based drafting, you need to consider, just because this guy isn't my plans or I don't have a strong player take on him, maybe that's your opportunity to sprinkle in some shares of this player at a good price.
It's the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on Better Sports Network.
It's going to be the quickest final segment we've ever had on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show. Eric Balkman from the FFPC. Hi, how are you? He's JD. John Daniel from the GOAT District, at JD GOAT District on Twitter. Hey, just as a reminder, the 2023 Fantasy Football Draft Guide has a great piece by our very own Andrew Cooper from Fantasy Alarm about running backs. We're about to talk about running backs in this round. Make sure you're checking out Andrew's piece over at fantasyalarm.com. Remember, the Fantasy Alarm All-Pro subscription has everything you need to win, including the Fantasy Alarm Fantasy Football Draft Guide, your cheat sheet, one-stop shop for dominating your drafts. And it's digital. It's constantly being updated with brand new information as we get it from the NFL. $26.99 is what you can get it for, or you can get it free with a monthly or annual All-Pro subscription to Fantasy Alarm. You can get a free 7-day trial of Fantasy Alarm All-Pro and get immediate free access to the draft guide when you go to fantasyalarm.com. So, JD, let's talk about some of these running backs that go off the board after the big studs are gone, and tell me if they're good targets for you in the FFPC Main Event, the Fantasy Pros Championship, the FFPC Best Ball Tournament, whatever. I want to lead things off with a guy who is going at the end of the 5th round, Florida State's own Cam Akers as running back 20.
I love a lot of these guys that you listed here, and Akers is the first guy. I mean, as much as this offense is, or this team is not necessarily going to go and win a Super Bowl, you still have McVay there. You still have Stafford there. We talk about narrow target trees. Kupp obviously is going to command targets. Higbee's like a sneaky tight end. Van Jefferson, one of my favorite late round receivers, because who else is going to catch the ball behind Kupp? But Akers, the thing with Akers is he was injured. He was in the doghouse, but he came back. And if you look at last year, his last four games of the season, he went 100 yards, 147 yards, 133 yards, 128 yards. So he gave you RB1, RB14, RB11, RB20 in your last 4 years. So he basically showed that he's back physically. He's out of the doghouse. There's no one else there. Henderson's gone, right? Henderson was the guy people were worried about in LA. And this team is not necessarily, like I said, going to go out there and just win game after game, but they're going to be competitive. They're not, McVay's not going to throw in the towel. Stafford's not going to throw in the towel. They're going to be throwing the ball a lot. And Akers could be part of that. He's shown that. So Akers at his price, man, all these guys in this range. I love all these guys in this range.
And you bring that up too. Like James Conner is not a guy I was kind of down on, like at the start of the year. But the more I read, the more I listen to people much smarter than me. I'm starting to warm up to Conner, and the fact, like, he hasn't been steamed up by the FFPC drafters. Like, I feel you could still get him at that 6-7 turn. He's technically an RB3 because he's running back 25. I think there's a lot to like about Conner. Obviously the injury price is already baked into his ADP, but man, Conner in the 7th round, sure.
Again, not attractive when you look at the Arizona offense, but with Kyler out, you got to think they're going to lean on a guy like James Conner. When James Conner is healthy, he's an RB1. Last year, he finished RB9 when you look at fantasy points per game. The year prior to that, RB7. Does he finish the season? Is he going to play 18 games? No. But like I said, you're looking for clean starts from your running backs. This guy's going to give you 13 to 15 start is what we're seeing historically. To me, it's a given he's going to miss those 3 to 4 weeks. But at his price, when you're talking, you can load up on receiver, tight end, and tight end premium, and then get yourself like a James Conner late. You can't ask for more than that. I mean, he's the definition late round. He's my 4th owned player right now on FFPC. Wow. Dan and I made a huge move for him earlier in the offseason. He's a big part of a lot of our teams.
I want to give you a little latitude to talk about this next player because it seems like every single week on this show, we've been talking a lot of Antonio Gibson with who's ever been the guest. And I feel like a lot of smart people are drafting a lot of him. And JD, I think you're included in the Gibson love here.
Yeah, I don't like hearing that. I like being under the radar. I like going against the grain personally, but it's hard not to like Gibby. You have the enemy coming in, so it kind of resets the offense, right? You like what he did in KC. Robinson is really one-dimensional. Like, we know what he does, so even if he has a role, we pretty much know what that role could be. And you've got weapons in Washington. You've got F1, McLaurin, you've got Dotson. We talked about earlier with that first-round capital. He looked awesome in his first year. I think he was great. And then Robinson complements well, but Gibby has that versatility. Defenses don't necessarily know what's happening when he's on the field. And if I'm not mistaken, he's an ex-receiver as well. So he gives you that versatility factor. I love grabbing Gibby. He's again, one of my most owned players. Robinson is a guy I'm avoiding. I way rather get a guy like Elijah Mitchell. We talk about San Francisco, and that's where I was going with the whole Shanahan rant, where I kind of got lost. Is guys get hurt in that offense. It's just the nature of the offense, of the scheme. So a guy like Elijah Mitchell to me right now is such a great value. You got to think he's going to, whether they're ahead in games and he takes over and, towards the back end of the game, or if he takes over for an injury, I think he has a lot of value. But going back to Gibby, I love Gibby at his price right now in Washington and the upside he offers with the pass catching.
Yeah, and that's I mean, like what it was Matthew Berry always say, I don't hate players, I hate ADP. Well, I don't love players, but I love ADP. And the fact that you can get Gibson running back 32 in the 8th round right now, I think makes a lot of sense there for sure. Let's move on and talk about David Montgomery. I don't know if it was Dan Campbell or somebody else talking about his pass catching chops being a little bit better than Jamal Williams. But obviously, you don't have to worry about DeAndre Swift anymore. You got to worry about Jahmyr Gibbs in Detroit. But your thoughts on David Montgomery right now as I look for his ADP here, running back 26 at the 702, JD.
Yeah, Montgomery is one of those guys that seems to kind of give you more than you expect. I feel like he's done that since his rookie year, even in Chicago. He's just like a grinder. You know, he's like you like cheering for a guy like David Montgomery. Problem is he's going to he's going to a situation where they just drafted Jahmyr Gibbs, and to me, Jahmyr Gibbs is special. He's definitely going to carve out a role in that offense, whether he takes over Alec Kamara or just is complementing what Montgomery does. Montgomery should get the offensive line work, all that kind of stuff, the goal line work. Sorry, not offensive line, but the goal line work. The problem for me is I keep going back to opportunity costs, and we just talked about James Conner. We talked about Pirine a bit. Damian Harris is another guy I like those running backs in Buffalo. Rashad Penny. To me, I rather grab those guys than David Montgomery just because of the upside. Early in the season, if I'm looking for a build and maybe I grab Bijan early and I want to complement that with a guy that's going to produce early, maybe I grab David Montgomery. But in a vacuum, just looking at opportunity costs in that round, there's a lot of guys I prefer to Montgomery right now.
I wish we had more time. We don't. I want to give you the opportunity to give me 30 seconds on each of these guys, the last two guys. We got to everything on the show sheet. I don't want to stop now. Miles Sanders no longer in Philly. He's in Carolina. Can you give us a half minute on him? And then Rachaad White, I think, is a little bit more compelling. This is a guy that's getting steamed up quite a bit and has been for about the last month and a half.
Yeah, Sanders, I talked about Carolina earlier. I mean, I love Sanders when he came into the NFL. I don't know we talk about Frank Reich and how he benefits the running back position, how many targets they get, how much volume they get. It's hard for me to invest in this offense. And again, opportunity cost, there's guys I prefer around Sanders right now. Look, if I'm wrong on this offense, I'm wrong, but it kind of fits in with that. Rachaad White, I know he's a big fan, or he's a favorite of the Podfather of Player Profiler. We saw Akers. I just talked about what he did at the end of last season. So, could Rachaad White do that or better? Totally could. He's going to be alone in that defense or in that running game. Fournette's gone. I said earlier, I like running backs in a good offense. This is probably not going to be a good offense. I'd rather get someone like Godwin in this offense at a discount. I don't want to avoid White. And he does have that upside. He has that possibility of being an RB1, being a workhorse kind of guy. I just temper my expectations and I limit my ownership with him.
Running back 22 is Rachaad White at the 603. John Daniel at JD Goat District on Twitter, at Goat District on Twitter. Give us the skinny. When is the Goat District pod on? How can we consume more of your content?
So you can find me at JD Goat District, obviously on Twitter. Follow at Goat District for the channel. You can find our channel, the Goat District channel, on YouTube, and you can find us every Wednesday night, 9 p.m. Eastern, on the Player Profiler Network, where we're doing, at least a show a week, an hour a week, and then we're doing a ton of other stuff on our channel, and you can find us on your favorite podcast platform. Balky, man, this has been a blast. I always appreciate the invite, and like I said, I really respect what you do. Putting the spotlight on the guests and how you steer the ship, and you do a really good job of it, whether you got a big beard or not, man. I love it.
Thank you, JD. Back at you. Davis Maddock joining the program next week. Nice. Dynasty Nerds and Garrett Price is up next. Go to myffpc.com. Register for those $2 million grand prize contests right now. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. We'll be back next Thursday.